So I will very briefly try to say a few words about where we are at the Tribunal for the Former Yugoslavia. I have the pleasure of being at those meetings for the last 6-7 years, and the first years I was mainly complaining about the non-arrest of the key fugitives, Karadzic and Mladic. And now, a few years later, I'm in the privileged situation to say that we're almost there, that we're almost at the end of those two trials, which are probably the most important trials in the history of the tribunal. And interestingly, they are taking place not at the beginning when the tribunal was created, but at the end. One of the reasons being that it has been so difficult to have the fugitives arrested, which is one of the big problems, unfortunately, the other tribunals we have and we don't have to deal with. So we are in the final phase for the Karadzic trial. The defense case rested in May. Final briefs will be submitted this week. Final arguments presented in 4 weeks' time. And then we hope to have a judgment somewhere before the summer of next year. So I hope that they will be able to announce conviction next year. Mladic trial, a little bit more complicated in the sense that there are a number of health issues. Trial is now in the defense phase. 30 witnesses already testified for the defense, still 150 or more than 150 to go. We hope that the trial also will be over by summer next year, so it takes time. There have been a number of developments and a number of decisions in relation to those cases. It would go too far to go into details, but perhaps only in relation to a reopening of the prosecution case we are asking today in the Mladic case in relation to a mass grave which has been discovered in September. All this to say, for those who are not so familiar with the context, the crimes were committed between mainly 92 and 95, and still today, every year, a number of mass graves are discovered. And so in September, a new mass grave was found, more than 400 remains. We have identified more than 285 individuals so far, more to be identified. And we have asked a reopening. Why? Because we think those are key elements in relation to the ethnic cleansing and genocide in relation to the municipalities. Those who are familiar with our jurisprudence know that in relation to Srebrenica, we have a number of convictions for genocide, because within 3 weeks, up to 8,000 men and boys were executed in 3 weeks' time in Srebrenica. But in relation to the ethnic cleansing campaign in more than 50 municipalities, we have a number of convictions for persecution, for crimes against humanity, but never for genocide as such, because the judges were of the opinion that the organized character, systematic character was not established enough to speak about genocide. We think we have a last chance to support the genocide charges. Why? Because the modus operandi, which is becoming clear, shows that those mass graves have been prepared days and weeks before the executions took place, so much more organized character of those killings in a number of municipalities, so we will see what will happen there. But the important thing here is really that even 20 years after the conflict, in a region which is relatively peaceful nowadays, with a big international presence, and countries which are getting close to the European Union, even there we are finding 20 years after the crimes a mass graves. It shows one of those big problems all of us are confronted. In relation to the jurisprudence, I want to mention two elements very briefly, and I understand we have perhaps a discussion afterwards. One in relation to specific direction. Remember perhaps that we went through a very big frustration in the office of the prosecutor, and I think larger than that, after an acquittal in relation to General Perisic at the appeals chamber of the ICTY. To make a long story short, he was the chief of staff of the Serbian army in Belgrade. He had been prosecuted, indicted for aiding and abetting, providing substantial support to the military forces in Bosnia, knowing that they were committing massive crimes. He was convicted in first instance by majority of judges, but he was acquitted in appeals because the majority of the appeal chamber was of the opinion that although it was established that he had provided substantial support in terms of logistic, financial support, and that he was aware of the commission of crimes, but that he had not specifically directed the support towards the commission of crimes. And because he was considered as being a remote perpetrator, because he was in Belgrade and not on the crime scene, a higher threshold was applied by the appeal chamber, and we were very shocked when he was acquitted. In the meantime, there has been the Charles Taylor trial, there has been Sajdovic trial, so 2 trials in appeal with a similar legal situation where we were very pleased in the interest of international justice and in the interest of the victims, but also of our host office, to see that this specific direction was not maintained, where a large majority of judges has decided that this specific direction notion is not in line with international humanitarian law, is not supported by our own jurisprudence, and is in fact creating more confusion than helping anybody else. I can say more about it later on. Last element, I know that 5 minutes are almost over, is in relation to sexual violence related jurisprudence. It's an issue we are discussing very, very often, and I hope that when I'm coming next time I will have a study with me. We are now finalizing at the ICTY about our good and bad experiences over the last 20 years in conducting sexual violence investigations. What have we done well? What could we have done better? So we are preparing a quite ambitious publication for next year. I hope you will be interested in it. And we had an interesting jurisprudence which unfortunately was not very much reflected in the media, and it's the following. We had a few acquittals in first instance where we prosecuted for killings, for extermination, for looting and for sexual violence, where there were convictions in all areas, with the exception of sexual violence, where the judges were of the opinion that it was not established that the sexual violence was part of the campaign of ethnic cleansing. And we were very pleased to see that in appeals we got these acquittals overturned, and where the judges were of the opinion that those crimes were foreseeable, that from the moment that commanders, that military and politically responsible are sending the soldiers into a situation, that the sexual violence as such is a foreseeable crime and should be treated exactly in the same manner as the other foreseeable crimes like lootings, killings and other crimes. So this was a quite interesting development. Those who are interested, I can of course send those decisions, because it is of course, as you can imagine, much more complex than I'm saying. And last word, we are still very much working with the prosecution offices in the former Yugoslavia. We're in our final phase, where we will probably close within 2-3 years' time. Next week I'm again in Sarajevo. There are still 2,500 cases to be conducted. We are trying to support capacity building initiatives and training in the former Yugoslavia to make sure that those cases will continue, because I'm absolutely convinced that the success or relative failure of our tribunal will very much depend on the way how those cases will continue in the former Yugoslavia, and how much the international community will maintain pressure to make sure that those cases are moving forward. Thank you very much.